book festival. We're just going to get started here. So this is writing on the new genre frontier. So if that's not what you're here for, you should probably leave.
Thank you very much.
You don't have to leave.
Okay.
So we're going to have a reading discussion from Kopernik. She's a queer Jewish fiction and poetry writer, the author of Things You Left, The Memory House, and The Other Body. We're also going to be hearing from Carol Buchanan, who is the writer of God's Thunderbolt, The Devil in the Bottle, Bold Under Ice, and The Ghost at Beaverhead. She also has some extra notes about her work for anyone who's interested in that afterward. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, hi.
Hello, I just had to adjust my hearing aid so I could hear you. If those of you, most of you sitting in the back would like to move forward, that would help.
Come on up.
And I just realized I made another mistake. I handed all the paper I have to you, yes. And along with it, I gave you the things I want to read. No, it's on the bottom.
Okay.
There's somebody sitting in the very back who understands this. And if he wouldn't mind standing up, come on, stand up. Give him a round of applause, because without him, I wouldn't be able to be here. He drives and keeps things straight. He's the computer guru in the family. Okay.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. So, hi everyone. I'm going to read from my new book. It's called The Memory House. This is the galley. That's why it has this. It doesn't really look this terrible when you look at it on the shelf. This is my notes one. This is a book about it's a memoir about my family who, my parents grew up in Israel, and I spent a lot of my childhood going back and forth between Israel and Chicago. So I decided to interview my parents about their childhoods and kind of get to know their stories a little bit better, and write a book about it. So, and in terms of the topic here, the crossing genres, I like to write, and I'll read a little bit and you'll hear that, but I like to write pretty simple and sort of in like poetry format. That's kind of, when you look at it, you'll see it's kind of laid out a little bit like poetry, but it's pretty narrative. And just kind of sparse, like no cutting away all the extra. That's why it's a skinny book, but there's a lot in here. It's just all the meat and no buns, gluten-free book. So, like extra meat though. So I thought instead of reading like a chunk, I would just kind of read from a few different sections so you can kind of get an idea of. There's a little bit of different styles and different stories, so I'll just kind of read a little bit from a few of the different sections. And I'm going to just kind of go in order, and it's not quite chronological in the book, but it does start sort of you'll hear in a very beginning place, and kind of wraps in the end. Okay. We are not made of angles. There is no one way, no one straight line, no one yes-no. All of our stories, different loops, same spirals. Same, different, same. We are made of woven circles. Adam from the Hebrew, man, person. Adamah from the Hebrew, earth. We are one species. There was a time when there were no gardens. The land was beige and dusty, the water sparse. The only fruit, the prickly pear, difficult to harvest through long spikes. Even those cacti were brought over from Mexico. Back then, before they lived there and for a short while after, the British owned the land. a small piece the size of New Jersey in the middle of the middle of the Middle East. A tender heart at the barely visible center. There is so much space like it for thousands of miles around, but everyone wants the sweet middle, the core, what they think is the soul. Borders are imaginary lines made up by people. My mother was born in the kitchenette of a one-room house on the kibbutz. So kibbutz is like a small community. Kibbutz, it's like a small socialist community, and I kind of talk about this in the book. But since I'm jumping around, I'll give you a little background. So my mother was born in the kitchenette of a one-room house on the kibbutz. Her brother was born on the dirt floor of the airport hangar, which is, they lived in this kind of British-owned airport hangar. Maybe this wasn't the best place to jump in. Anyway, do your best with the imagination. Their baby brother was born in the hospital, and when Savta, so Savta means grandmother and Saba means grandfather. When Savta went into labor, my mother and her brother were left with older friends who also spoke Hungarian and had endured the Holocaust. They lost their families and so became tied to ours. In the years after World War II, it was common to make new friends with new family with survivors. The family friend's house smelled like eggs and cabbage. They fed my mother noodli, a potato noodle dish sprinkled with sugar and cinnamon. The wife looked like a safta, her hands stained with liver spots, her bosom hulking under a floral print dress that hung around her body like a tablecloth. The wife asked my mother if she wanted to be her child, if she wanted to go on tractor rides, said she would buy my mother a raincoat. She once had a daughter who died after 2 days. After that, she was no longer able to have children. Saba, my grandfather, left Romania first in 1940 as Europe became heated with anti-Semitism. People banded together on illegal boats to find freedom in British-ruled Palestine. Some people made it, some were sent back to Europe, some were sent to prison camps in Cyprus, some drowned. Saba's boat made it safely to Palestine and he became free. He sent word to Safta to join him. She was afraid but could no longer work in Europe, could no longer walk alone down the street, buy groceries at the market, talk to anyone in public. If she stayed, she would be killed for being Jewish, like many of her friends. If she boarded an illegal boat, she could drown, she could die in a camp, or she could make it. This picture of Safta through my mother's words and the wrinkled photographs in Safta's attic, a resilient imprint when I close my eyes and listen. Holocaust museums everywhere, every year. I always knew what the 1940s looked like. When we were kids, we called gaunt people concentration camp victims. Upon landing in Palestine, Safta's boat was captured by the British and taken to Atlit. Atlit was a 25-acre prison detention camp south of Haifa. Eastern European refugees tried to escape war, so the British built prison camps to contain them. My grandparents left anti-Semitic Europe to arrive in anti-Semitic Palestine. 3/4 of a century later, in 2016, Syrian refugees on illegal boats, same, trying to escape into Europe. Same thing, same. Atlit was a prison surrounded by barbed wire, guarded by British soldiers and watchtowers. 7 p.m. curfew, men and women separated, 1-hour visitation for married couples. Babies born inside corrugated metal barracks. On entrance, prisoners had to strip naked and wait in line for a shower, just like in German concentration camps. Some people came to Atlit from places like Auschwitz. They had forgotten the comfort of real showers. Atlit was a prison for Jews, not a concentration camp, but a prison for Jews, not criminals. People who were different, the same, different. Like in concentration camps, prisoners didn't know when, if ever, they would be released. I'll just read one more section. My father's father was born in 1900, a communist in the Russian Revolution of 1920. Left as Stalin arrived, his place no longer what he knew it to be. He escaped to Israel-Palestine, never went back to Russia, never talked about her. He died of pancreatic cancer 1 month before my parents were married. They had to change their wedding date. A famous picture of him in black and white, wild hair, cigarette hanging out of his mouth, holding my father wrapped in a blanket. Maybe there was no cigarette, but usually there was. Famous pictures relative to photo albums and my memories remind me of stories my mother told me. I never knew that Saba, never called him Saba, but I knew he smoked, he was funny, and he was always in black and white. When my father's mother was put into hospice, my father packed her home, his childhood, her life, books, papers, documents, in Hebrew, English, German, Russian, Yiddish, a lifetime of alphabets and numbers and pages. He found his father's papers, papers he had never seen, buried deep inside old wooden desk drawers. My father's father was born in 1898, not 1900. Why did he lie? I asked my father. I don't know, he sighed. I don't know. I like to think he was a friend of Emma Goldman, blacklisted during the Russian Revolution, that his Jewish Russian political immigrant status connected him to the pieces of history that inspire me, the people I came from who made progress through struggle, the way my parents struggled. I like to think he liked to think like me. That's it.
Okay. I think it's a wonderful time to be a writer these days because we have so much flexibility. We can write short, we can write in mixed genres, as she has done and as I'm doing, and we can find a reader for almost any book. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because we don't just write for ourselves, we write for other people. My view is we serve the reader. That's why we write. So that readers will gain something from the experience we put into paper or Kindle, and they read it. And if there is no dialogue in there, then we're writing journals, I think. Anyway, the time has come now. There is so much flexibility of length. We can write super short flash stories, which are less than 1,000 words, but a complete story. We can write novels going up to 200,000 words, although I wouldn't recommend it because it takes a heck of a long time, and people just don't have that much time to read anymore. I know of two young men that I've encountered recently. One of them, they both are employed, they both have families, they both live in Flathead County, where she and I come from. Jonathan has 45 minutes a day to read. He loves reading, and I've given him a lot of books because I'm kind of downsizing, but he only has 45 minutes a day to read. There's another young man who can only read, if you want to call it reading, by listening to books on his commute from between Kalispell and Columbia Falls, that 15-mile commute. And people here, I think, may have a longer time with their commute, but that's the only time they have to read. Or in between customers or clients, they might have this much time. So we write short so that we give them the same kind of deep experience that people will have reading a longer work. And that's difficult, but I think she's doing it. So, I published a flash Western story about a year ago. I'm going to read it for you now. Joel Van Fleet walked across the street from the livery barn to the Cheap Shot Saloon. Hat brim pulled down to shield his eyes from the rain. His feet squelched inside his boots as he tromped to the door. Lord, he asked his maker, a dry land needs rain, but this abundance? He pushed the door open. It was a quiet place. Men eyed him slantwise as he walked in the bar. By an upright piano, a wide-eyed woman stood with her hand on the piano player's shoulder. Van Fleet asked the bartender, "Are you James Sugg?" Yes, sir, and you? The bartender's voice squeaked. There was no mirror behind Sub, who stared past him at something that frightened him, and now Van Fleet heard the silence. No chair legs creaked over the plank floor. No cards slapped down on the tables. No one said, 4 bits, see ya, or fold. There was no music. Van Fleet raised his voice. I am Brother Joel Van Fleet, inviting everyone to Christian services tomorrow evening at 2. No, tomorrow morning at 10. The bartender set a bottle of whiskey on the bar by his elbow. The bottle wobbled, settled. Yes, sir. Here's yours, sir, if you want it, he mouthed. Take it and go. Thank you, Mr. Sugg. I'm a Methodist, which meant he wouldn't drink. Sugg picked up the bottle and froze. Van Fleet risked a glance over his shoulder. A tall man aimed a revolver at him. Holding both hands shoulder high, he turned to face the gunman. No one had ever pointed a weapon at him. He had wondered what he would do if someone did. A hollow opened up in his middle. The room faded away until he and the pistolier were alone on the earth. Run, voices clamored in his ears. He sagged against the bar that propped him upright. I always wanted to bag me a preacher, said the gunman. Van Fleet tried to suck air into his lungs. Thunder rolled outside. Already? You're calling me home, Lord? Is this all you want of me? Please not now. I am not ready. A calm settled over him. He stood away from the bar and spoke to the gunman. Go ahead. I won't have to eat Weevilly biscuits. If you pull that trigger, I'll go to a feast prepared for me. To his own surprise, he felt a smile pull at the edges of his mouth. A warmth spread through it. He could even like the gunman, a fellow sinner, if he weren't looking at his death. I forgive you. What the law does afterwards, that'll be different. Holding the pistol in both hands, the gunman thumbed back the hammer. The cylinder ratcheted forward. Move aside, Sug. Van Fleet heard singing. The woman by the piano had a beautiful voice. The shot rang out. He heard her scream at the same time the bottle crashed to the floor. Dropping his revolver, the gunman sank to his knees, his face in his hands. So that's one thing we can. The problem with that, though, is, thank you very much, is finding who to publish it. And that was published in an anthology of Western flash fiction. And I published another story about Brother Joel in the next one. And then, of course, forgot to bring the books with me to show you. But, oh well. That's one thing we can do. We can. The thing about writing flash, or very short fiction, or nonfiction, and I've sought for a long time to have a different kind of metaphor for this. But you have to, go ahead, come and sit down. But you have to leave it with something that lingers in the memory, something contained in the tail of the story, in the end. And it's kind of like, and I hate this metaphor, but I can't think of a better one, kind of like a scorpion. Because it's a very small insect, really nasty, and it has a sting in the tail. But you can have a good sting in the tail of a flash story. But that's what you need: character, conflict, and the ending has to leave the reader with something they'll remember, even though the story is very short. I'd be curious to know if you remembered that story in half an hour. If you did, I did my work right. The trouble is, though, as the people in the audience before me, or excuse me, Raki, were saying, it's how to sell them. And of course, they said write what you feel you need to write, which is true, and don't worry about the reader. But I would say, yeah, you're writing for the other person at the end. It's a dialogue.
Can I interject for a second?
Just a second. Hold that thought, Mike.
Okay.
Okay. Because I'm just about to make a change of subject. In 1973, I sent it, when we could still do this, I sent a Western novel, that's what I write basically. I sent a Western novel to Doubleday. And I waited about 6 months. And then I wrote and said, what's with this, basically. And they sent the book back, along with the nicest rejection letter I've ever had. They said, the editor said, this is a very good novel with many fine moments, but we don't know how to sell it. In 1973. Things have not changed in the last 46 years, almost 50 years. They still don't know how to sell it.
I do disagree with you a little bit. I have a book coming out in the spring that is mostly flash fiction, short stories. And I think that the way that we engage with that kind of stuff now, with like sort of different kind of unsellable work, is like it's a small press that's putting it out. You know, I don't have to, a small press. So like this is a small press, but it's wonderful to work with them. And I mean, I'm not going to make $1 million, but even if you're in a big press, you're not going to make a lot of money unless you're really, 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 really famous and everybody knows who you are. So, can I finish my thought?
Sorry.
So I would say that what is your, you know, if you want to write that kind of, you know, if that's your passion to write, for me it definitely is different kind of stuff. I'm not really interested in writing a novel, but short stories. There's so many places now, there's so many really cool small presses, which I think a lot of people in this festival are connected to. Small presses, self-publishing. I have a blog where I write flash fiction stories based on my dreams, and then and a lot of my short stories have been published, same like in smaller, you know, reviews or online, different online stuff. So there's actually a lot of places to put your stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
I have some questions about your book and about you.
Yeah.
You said that this is about writing, I guess, cross genres. What are the genres that you have crossed
in this book?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I would say it's, like I said kind of at the beginning, it's sort of like there's a poetry format.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it is pretty narrative. I think the cross genre is more like when you're looking at it, and it's also like a pretty skinny book, pretty little.
Uh-huh.
So it's, again, this is like a hard to sell book because it's small. So I think that's part of the cross genre.
So you think it's like a memoir, sort of, or family history written in a poetic style?
Exactly.
Poetry style.
Beautiful. Yeah, I call it like poetic memoir is what I call it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what it is actually is a braided essay form, in which you have, and that's part of creative nonfiction. You start out with, you have one thread running through the piece, and then you have poetic work and maybe some explanation, just like she said. And she's absolutely, and Raki's absolutely right about there is no end now to the venues where you can get your stuff out there. You can put it online. There are dozens of publishers online who will take very short things or longer things. Any length that you want, that your story requires, you can find a venue for it.
Yeah.
Everywhere. And that's one of the beauties of being a writer too, online or not online, or traditionally published or self-published. I've been a self-publisher for 11 years, and it's great. I have an audience. It works. But I don't have anything against going with a traditional publisher.
So
Yes.
your genre, you write Western Christian fiction, is that it? The genre that you've done this story from, is it Western Christian fiction or?
Sometimes I write for whoever wants to read it. Mostly it's Westerns. Categorizing cross-genre things is difficult.
Well, isn't that what this workshop's about? I thought this panel was about blending genres, and so I'm curious about the genres that you blended and how that works for you.
When I write, the thing I'm writing now,
Also, Raki, I wanted to talk to you about ask you about your book. Like, how was that to work on that story, those stories about your family's history for you? Like, that must have been, I don't know, must have been really eye-opening.
Yeah.
And you talked about one grandfather who never spoke about his experience, is that right? And so how did you get that information? Did you?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I don't really feel like I'm a memoir writer or a family story writer. I really just like decided to write this book, and then I did it sort of quick. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I'd really like to write more like flash fiction. But it was at the last election, and I felt like I started to tell all these stories that I knew about my family all the time. And I was like, I should just write a fucking book about this because I'm tired of, it's exhausting to tell these stories. And that people really didn't know a lot of this history. And so I decided to sit down with my parents and interview them, and I asked them, can I interview you? And I'll ask you all these questions about your childhood, and will you tell me all the stories you remember? And then I'm gonna transcribe it, and will you give it to me to do what I wanna do, like creative, you know? And that was also like really scary for them to read it, but they love it, and they're very supportive, and they feel very honored by it. But it was really interesting to hear. You know, I always tell people, like, if you have people around that you knew as a child or that raised you, or ask them their stories. Like, we all have such interesting stories. Every single person has cool stories. It's because we grew up in a different time than our parents. So it's things that we didn't live and experience. And so, yeah, the process of it was really, really interesting. And still today, they keep telling me more stories. And I'm like, I wish you told me that when I was interviewing you. I'm going to write another book.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I feel very like, I'm done with this. It was intense. It's an intense book. It's like, I'm glad I did it. It's important. And now I want to do something else. You know,
collect the stories.
The stories, yeah.
Keep the
collecting the
because
stories.
sometime you're going to want to do that.
I agree. Yeah. I think
just don't let them go.
collect stories.
When I started out doing, it's really, I've been waiting to spring this on you because we're working in parallel.
Yeah.
We really are. I write both the Western fiction and which is historical fiction. The book that's for sale over there is called The Ghost at Beaverhead Rock, and I use fictional characters as stand-ins because I don't know what Wilbur Sanders was thinking when he voted with the other members of the executive committee on the Vigilantes to hang 24 men. I can't know that kind of inner thought and feeling about that. So I created an attorney from New York who is the stand-in for Wilbur Sanders. That's the fictional part. The historical part is that everything in the book really happened based on 7 years of research into the vigilante era, 1862 to 1865. And that people, when those books came out, have said, well, you're really writing narrative history, or you're really writing creative nonfiction. But because there were fictional characters at the time, I had to say this is historical fiction. So that's where this may illustrate a little better about the blending of genres and the braided aspect of it. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Go for it.
all right. This is, come on in and sit down. Welcome to the group. This is from my, this is a shortened, condensed form of a piece of the work that I'm writing now called Tribulation Way. And it's the story of a woman, a widow, in the late 19th century who escaped the slums of St. Louis and came out to eastern Montana to homestead with her 2 young boys and a feeble younger brother. She was my grandmother. So, my grandfather died before my father was born in St. Louis in 1894. I asked Dad, "Where did you live there?" "We lived in a slum." He bit down on the words. His face reddened and he walked away. True. He was ashamed. I asked no more questions about life in St. Louis. Long after he died, I wondered why they chose to homestead in Montana in 1900. My mother didn't really know, but she said his Uncle John invited them. 2 more decades passed. Both of them are dead, long dead now, and I am left with unanswered questions. Research begins. I find a book published in 1908, Housing Conditions in St. Louis, written by Charlotte Rumbold, a professional social worker. She reports on a downtown slum area studied by the Housing Committee of the Civic League in St. Louis. I find the address where my father's Uncle Jim lived within the boundaries of the study. Knowing the family, I surmise that my widowed and pregnant grandmother and her 9-year-old son lived with Jim. They pooled their resources. Her housekeeping and cooking in exchange for a roof. He was an elevator operator, was of a salary perhaps $297 a year. The Rumbold report describes the area in words and photographs. I surmise Lou's reaction to seeing it on a rainy day. Lou was my grandmother. The janitor, so-called, led them through a dark, narrow passageway under a large building into a yard between the backs of 2 rows of dilapidated houses. One row fronted 13th Street. The other faced the alley. Breathing in shallow pants, Lou smelled a combined stench she identified as rotting meat and oranges mixed with raw sewage. Disgust rose sharp and bitter in her throat. The janitor pointed toward a stairway rising from the shadows to a porch. That's 1014, up them stairs, 2nd floor, in the rear. The ground floor stood in shadow. She could not make out where the stairs began, but on the upper story, ropes on pulleys strung across the yard held people's washing, rain spotted, needing laundering again. Under the porch, a rank of 4 privies stood. The stairway climbed over them. As they walked toward it, the clouds broke, showing a privy standing open. The seat seemed to be a square table with no boards around the bottom to prevent a person from soiling her shoes. The water hydrant stood 2 feet in front. A sign over it warned, "Do not waste water." Her stomach roiled and she swallowed hard. While she was bearing, she could use the chamber pot, but once the baby came, that indulgence would end. She'd have to traipse down here like everyone else. Rubber boots would be the answer, she supposed, and great care with her skirts. She'd have to come down here for water anyway. I thought I knew slums after living in New York City on the Lower East Side in 1969. The super of the building delivered rat poison to each apartment. But I know nothing. So the parts that say I and me are kind of memoir. They're definitely first person. That's the me who's really not me, the narrator speaking. The fictional part belongs to Lou's reaction to that, which I interpreted from my father's shame at even mentioning it some 60 years later. And that's how genres get blended, like Raki is doing. You take the feeling that you have about the subject and you write that feeling into the words. And then the words speak to the reader, and the reader is changed somewhat, we hope positively, by that experience, by the experience of reading what you write.
I was thinking about something else about genre crossing when you asked what genre or what the crossing is in my book, and I was thinking that a lot of it too for me is kind of like changing the rules, so not doing complete sentences or breaking the lines or not having quotes on the dialogue and the paragraphs not being indented. And I do a lot of stuff like that. I think sort of like the little things are like breaking the rules, which so then it kind of looks like the way that you read something when you don't do complete sentences or when you move things and you break the lines, your pauses are different. The way that when you're just alone, not reading out loud necessarily, but when you're looking at it on your own, like I don't do the indents and I don't do the quotes, and you kind of, your pace is different. And so I think that's part of, it just occurred to me. I was thinking about what you said, your question, and so, yeah, does that make sense? Yeah.
So what do you find, what's the most challenging about writing flash fiction? Is it more difficult, you think, than writing longer work?
More difficult, because you have less room to work. It all has to be done in a very compressed space.
For me, it's way easier. It's so much easier. It's like, because it's like a scene, it's like a moment. Instead of writing scene after scene after scene and trying to make everything connect, it's just like a scene, It's like, and I write a lot of my flash stories I write like from a dream, so there was a lot of like magical realism, and so it's sort of weird anyway. And so I'm like, how can I just sort of write it and find like, it's just like a little arc instead of a huge arc that's like you said earlier about being braided. It's not, for me, it's not really braided, it's just like, there's the thing, and then it has like sort of a beginning, middle, and end in a very compact, I mean, you can kind of hear that in the story that Carol just read. It's like, but you're saying it's more difficult. For me, it's easier, but it's because it's just sort of like smushed, you just sort of go, okay, this, and then this, and then this, instead of trying to make a big, complicated web. For me, it's so much harder to write longer stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
We've both got so much to say on the subject, we keep interrupting each other.
It's okay. That's a good thing.
I
We
think
have lots
so.
of thoughts. That's a
Yeah,
good
we
thing.
do.
We're engaged.
Yeah. The part I just read you about my grandmother, I took a class in experimental forms through Creative Nonfiction magazine this summer, and it was fantastic. It was really great. The first assignment was to write a braided essay in 300 words, or less, or fewer, excuse me. And there was a button to click, and the button said, start writing. And I'd been thinking about this assignment for a while, and of course I was deep into Tribulation Way and all this stuff floating around. And so I clicked on the button and I wrote this, as you heard it.
Yeah, sometimes it just comes out. It's a scene. Yeah.
That's the draft. That's it. I think I may have changed a couple words. Yes, sir.
So I'm curious, do you write these short stories and publish them some way or other, separately on their own, and then eventually take at least some of them and compile them into a book
That can happen, yeah. That can happen.
with the braid that runs through them all?
What what the little story about my grandmother is going to do is that provided a bit of a blueprint for what I'm calling the St. Louis section of the story. And I sent that St. Louis section much worked over, of course, because it was going to an agent I had met at a conference a year and a half ago, and he wrote back and said that he had a couple of things, for me to correct, but to go ahead and finish it and send it to him. But, that sounds like great news, right? The agent wants the whole thing. But he doesn't know how he can sell it. I mean, here we are back in 1973. Somebody else says, this is great work, but I don't know how I can sell it. And we're always going to have to live with categories because that's how readers find their favorite things to read. You know you like romance fiction, you know you like this kind of thing, you know you don't like fiction, you only want to read that sort of book. And how do we slot the writing into something for a reader to find? That's our biggest, I think that may be one of our biggest problems as writers.
Well, I'll say this book.
But you can put it any place, but if you want to put it on Amazon, it's a whole different ballgame.
Well, this book is on Amazon. I don't even know it's maybe under memoir, but when they first took it at my bookstore where I live, they put it in poetry, and I was like, oh, I actually want it in memoir. So then we just moved it to memoir. So I actually think it creates more space in a way if you are like, this is what it is. I mean, it's a little bit of semantics because you can just say, hello, this is my book, this is what it is, and then that's what it is. I mean, not if you're with a big press, and again, you're trying to sell it, but if you're working with small presses, they'll work with you, and that's kind of a really cool thing. And again, it's like people more and more are drawn to small presses. There are small press sections in bookstores, and you can find, if you're interested in, experimental writing, you can find that now. You can Google it, best experimental writers, whatever. You can Google anything at this point and find what you're looking for. So I think that in a way it's like better, the times are better now because there's more space for everything and everyone. And I think you still can decide and you can hold strong to like, this is what genre my book is for the bookstore, and this is what it is if I'm talking about it, and those don't have to be the same thing.
And I get the opinion then that you're kind of the editor too.
You mean like working with a small press?
Yeah.
No, there's an editor.
Okay.
There's still it depends on the press, there's still the levels. But, I mean, for example, they sent me, so this is called like a galley or an ARC, advanced reader copy, and they say, this is how we laid it out, what do you think? And if I want to make a change, I can edit and make a change, but they're, at the end of the day, they're the editor, and they sent me different cover ideas, and they said, which one do you like? Do you want to, so you're involved in the process more of editing, but it depends on the press. Maybe for some presses you are ultimately the editor, but yeah.
The reason I like self-publishing is that I'm a control freak. And I really, really do like having total control over not only the writing and the editing, because I do my own, but the cover designs and how the book is presented. I think, though, I'm getting a little weary about writing big fat books like The Ghost at Beaverhead Rock. I've won awards for my novels, thank goodness, God is good. But there comes a time when I love writing short. And I love what Raki's talking about with the ability to place it almost anywhere. Mm-hmm. And no book ever reaches everybody. But when you reach the right readers, And we don't know when that happens often. But when you reach the right readers, then that's wonderful. And we have more opportunities now, I think, than ever before to reach the right readers. And where categories come in, basically they're from the big publishers, the big five or whatever, because they're owned by conglomerates. And like all business people, you have to eat. You know, we're all addicted to eating. And you have to keep the lights on, and you have to pay people's salaries. So they've got the categories in that are very cut and dried. But what I wanted to tell about is a man in Germany who has found a way to cut through all the category nonsense and by crunching numbers. So I'd recommend, if there are any writers in the audience, and I hope most of you are, go online and find a website called K-Lytics, K-Lytics.com, and you will find a lot of studies about various genres and how Amazon uses them. And what Amazon has done is to take the regular categories that the big publishers go by and then get down to the 4th and 5th level. And that helps if you want to write literature, if you write a book and it's literature and fiction, romance, suspense, crime, and then down into a 5th one. That takes in all of those things, and your book can maybe reach more people. I would think that would be okay.
Yeah, we just have a few minutes left, so I was going to say if there's any questions or comments, go ahead.
I just had an observation I wanted to make about the precision of your choice of language and words, and there wasn't anything extra that didn't need to be there. And what it did in my hearing you read your piece was it was full of imagery and movement. And I was engaged immediately because I didn't know how the story was going to end. I didn't know if the boat was going to arrive or depart or whatever, and then on we went. And I found that to be a very rich experience because I was invited in. And like you're reading the piece of your grandmother, I now have an image of those outdoor bathrooms that were poorly constructed and being careful of mess making and smells. And it was a compressed period of time in which you did it, right? You were allowed, it was an assignment. And out of that was birthed something I think very rich and important that you're going to incorporate further. But it's the element of, I write very short fiction, anywhere from 3 to 5.5, maybe 6 pages. I've done some longer things, and it's such a challenge. But sometimes it just comes, and within 25 or 40 minutes or 45 minutes, maybe an hour, something wonderful can appear, or not, but often it does.
Yeah.
You could go on Amazon. Have you ever gone to Amazon and investigated the short reads?
I'm not so interested in that. No, I haven't. I was just interested in the craft and what my experience was this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very
the boat
much.
does arrive.
Yeah.
If you read the book, the boat arrives. Don't worry, because it's my grandmother, so she made it. Well, I think and if there's no other questions or comments, last chance. Okay, thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.